Every empire claims it brought civilization. The British insisted they brought railways, law, and order to India. But follow the money and a different picture appears. An entire subcontinent, its land, its labor, even its salt and breath, was converted into cash flows, not by accident, by design. From Bengal's rice fields to the opium factories of Bihar, from cotton in Bombay to jute in Calcutta. The Raj turned people and nature into revenue streams, then piped those streams to London. The wonder isn't that India was governed, it's that India was monetized. Empires don't just conquer territory, they standardize extraction. They convert customs into contracts, reciprocity into rent, abundance into taxable income. The British Raj perfected this conversion. The label said civil administration. The ledger said recurring cash flow. To understand how an empire monetized a civilization, we have to follow the receipts, from company rule to crown rule, from tax schedules to exchange bills, from grain markets to battlefields. And to see the full machine, we start at the beginning. It begins not with a flag, but a balance sheet. In 1600, the East India Company was chartered as a trading firm. By 1757, after Plassey, it was something stranger, a merchant that had acquired a state. The decisive pivot came in 1765 when the company obtained the Diwanee, the right to collect revenue in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. One signature transformed a trading enterprise into a tax authority. Revenue first, governance second. That was the order. Because revenue, predictable, monetized, legal, turns conquest into dividend. The company didn't need to invent a tax system, it captured one. It took existing land revenues and court fees, standardized them, raised targets, and enforced payment in cash. The village economy, once buffered by customary obligations, was relabeled as receivables. Then came the elegant loop. The company paid its shareholders in London using Indian collections. It purchased Indian goods with Indian taxes, then exported those goods to Europe and counted the proceeds again. 1 rupee did double duty, first as a tax, then as purchasing power diverted to company accounts. The mechanism later got a name, the drain. At the time, it had a schedule, a target, and a whip. Monetization starts when a conqueror captures a revenue system and converts subsistence into cash obligation. Once subsistence is measured in rupees, scarcity becomes delinquency, and delinquency becomes a legal matter. The next act was to securitize the countryside. Land wasn't just soil, it became a bond with a coupon attached. The British experimented with 3 systems to convert fields into instruments. In Bengal, the permanent settlement fixed the land tax nominally forever and made zamindars responsible for payment. Miss your quota and your estate went to auction. Customary dues became cash rents. Peasants moved from community obligations to evictions. A landlord class became the intermediary guaranteeing revenue to Calcutta and by extension to London. The settlement created a financial instrument, land with a fixed tax lien, and a market to sell it. In Madras and Bombay, riotory skipped landlords and bound cultivators directly to the state. Officials assessed each plot, careers rose on collections, and the monsoon did not change the calendar. Cash was due. In the north, Mahawari assessed entire village units and made the group jointly liable. Social pressure did the work of police. If one farmer failed, all paid. Monetization embedded itself inside community ties, turning neighbors into enforcers. Across all systems, the goal was identical: secure, regular liquid revenue. Barter doesn't pay London bills, cash does. So the Raj made cash the hinge of rural life, and when cash is the hinge, credit becomes the lock. Moneylenders, once peripheral, became essential. Default led to land sales. Titles moved toward those who could meet cash schedules, even if they never touched the soil. The harvest fed cities, but the calendar fed the treasury. And with the countryside converted into a bond market, the state went searching for monopolies you could taste. Salt and opium were chosen with surgical precision. Salt was not a luxury, it was a human requirement. The British imposed a salt tax and built a barrier, the salt line, stretching hundreds of miles to police it. Smuggling table crystals became a felony. A monopoly on survival turned every mouth into a meter and every meal into a receipt. Opium, cultivated in the fields of Bihar, became policy. The state held a monopoly. It advanced cash to cultivators, set prices, processed the paste in factories, and shipped the product to Canton. Indian farmers were forced into a cash crop they didn't to eat, to sell a narcotic the British could use to balance their books with China without shipping silver. Tea in Britain created a drain of bullion to China. Opium inverted the flow. Addiction became an exchange rate strategy. The triangle was brutal and efficient. Indian peasants produced opium. Chinese consumers paid in silver. London tea drinkers got their brew. Company and crown balanced their books. A social wound in one society patched a commercial deficit in another. Monetization without pretense. The best colonial taxes are the ones you can't avoid. Salt you must consume, debt you must service, a vice someone else must buy. And look, the Raj said, we gave you railways. Yes, and the returns were guaranteed by Indians for British investors. Under the guarantee system, private British companies built lines with a state promise, a fixed rate of return, often 5%. If profits fell short, the Indian Treasury, funded by Indian taxes, made up the difference. If profits exceeded the floor, much of the upside still flowed outward through fees, procurement, and management. Capture a revenue base that already exists, standardize it, raise targets, demand cash, create monopolies over essentials like salt and strategic vice like opium, tax what people must consume and what outsiders will always buy. Guarantee returns to foreign capital and development, so local taxes underwrite distant dividends. Engineer currency and payments, so exports are settled against the colony's own treasury, not fresh inflows. Shift production toward commodities with global buyers, away from local subsistence, to ensure permanent dependence on cash. Legalize the pipeline through courts, stamps, fees, and police. Turn administration into a metronome for collections. Then bill the wars to the governed. Do this for decades. Teach a generation to think of the tax calendar as a season. Teach another to measure success by export volumes. Teach a third to accept that the best jobs come from companies guaranteed by their own poverty. 3 generations later, everyone calls it the economy. That's monetization. That's the trick. Drain of wealth wasn't a slogan, it was an accounting identity. When the money flowing out exceeds money permitted to flow in, the difference is paid in kind, in calories not consumed, in education not received, in futures not realized. Systems talk can turn cold, so look at the human math. A peasant grows cotton because cash taxes are due. Prices fall, debt rises. He mortgages land, the monsoon fails, he borrows again. The moneylender forecloses. The land is auctioned. The buyer is a man who doesn't farm but can meet a calendar. The former owner becomes a tenant on his own earth, paying rent to service someone else's loan that services someone else's bond that guarantees someone else's return. From field to fee to foreclosure, a pipeline. Not every story ends like that, but enough did to make it policy by outcome. In towns, a weaver watches Manchester cloth undercut his prices. He closes shop and takes work as a coolie on the railways built with his cousin's taxes. His wage is monetized labor, his ticket out is a coin he can't save because the price of salt rose again. Monetization is not only about how money leaves a country, it is about how expectation leaves a household. There was resistance. Boycotts against imported cloth, agitations against salt, movements to reduce rents. But here's the bitter elegance of a monetized regime. Resistance itself generates revenue. A march requires permits. A trial requires fees. A prison needs guards paid from the treasury. A crackdown justifies budgets. Even reform, say adjusting land assessments, demands new surveys and stamps. The state bills its own corrections. Reformers attacked the machine's moral logic. Administrators adjusted its settings. Meanwhile, the core remained. Taxes due, monopolies enforced, guarantees honored, paper flows managed. A polished extraction is still extraction. Strip the mechanisms to plain language. Who pays first? Villagers, townspeople, traders, through taxes, fees, and prices shaped by policy. Who gets paid no matter what? Guaranteed investors, pensioners abroad, imperial suppliers, and the administrative class. Who bears risk? Cultivators facing monsoons and markets, artisans displaced by imports, workers whose wages chase taxes, not savings. If those answers stay constant across decades, you don't have an economy. You have a hierarchy with a cash interface. When the Raj ended, balance sheets didn't simply zero out. Institutions remained, railways stayed, the tax calendar endured. The habit of measuring success by export volumes persisted. And the vacuum left by guaranteed returns and metropolitan control had to be filled by new states, new debts, new development plans. Independence cancels a flag. It does not automatically cancel a financial architecture built over a century and a half. That's why the question, did the British bring development, misses the point. They brought monetization, a total conversion of society into streams legible to a distant ledger. Some streams watered fields, many watered accounts abroad. The residue is the challenge every post-colonial economy faces. How to convert monetization back into prosperity for the people who live on the land that pays the bills. Think of the small details that made the model hum. Court stamps that turned grief into paperwork, octroi gates that converted city walls into toll booths, excise patrols that followed the scent of liquor and the glitter of salt, railway freight tables that made wheat move faster to port than to a hungry district next door, telegraphs that moved orders for grain sales more quickly than orders for relief, an exchange rate standard that looked modern and neutral but had a bias baked in its bridges. The empire wore a uniform of numbers. That uniform was always ironed. Sometimes the defense is, but the British built institutions. True. They built institutions to collect, to guarantee, to remit, and to police. The institutions that genuinely served the public interest did so on terms that also served distant investors. Infrastructure is not neutral if the first line on its prospectus is a guarantee paid by someone else. Law is not neutral if the price of entry is a fee the poor cannot spare. Currency is not neutral if the pathway of settlement starts and ends in the same treasury. The test is simple. When the monsoon fails, who bends, the calendar or the farmer? When war comes, whose pockets are turned inside out, those who fight or those who are guaranteed? When the economy grows, who captures the first and safest slice, those who produce or those whose capital was promised a floor? The story of the Raj is the story of a machine built to monetize life and remit the proceeds elsewhere. Land became a lien, salt became a tariff, railways became annuities, currency became a siphon, labor became a line item, and every year, as regularly as the monsoon, the bills were due. So when you hear that empire brought modernity, ask, at what interest rate? When you see a railway map, ask, guaranteed to whom? When you taste salt, ask, taxed by whose hand? Because the genius of the Raj was not conquest. It was conversion, turning a civilization into cash flows and ensuring those flows ran uphill. Politicians love to speak of benevolent rule. Balance sheets tell fewer lies. If you follow the cash, you discover that this was not a volunteer economy. It was a scheduled one. The calendar ruled the village, the guarantee ruled the railway, the bill ruled the currency, the court stamp ruled the grievance, and the home charge ruled the bridge to London. The empire survived by sword, yes, but it endured by schedule. And the schedule was written in rupees. Look closely and you see a pattern that outlives its makers. The techniques of monetization, guarantees, monopolies, exchange tricks, legal fees, do not vanish when the flag is lowered. They migrate into new institutions, new contracts, new slogans. The challenge for any society that inherits such a system is not simply to reject it, but to rewire it so that the first and safest slice of prosperity belongs to those who produce, not those who hold paper to their throats. History will not do this work for you, but it will offer a map of the traps. The British Raj did not merely govern India, it priced it.